Welcome back, curious minds, to another episode of Absurd History Unplugged. Today, we're diving into the strange, the ridiculous, and the downright bizarre facts about what really went down during the time of the Black Plague. Let's be honest, when you think about the Black Death, you probably think, oh no, mass death and societal collapse, how utterly grim. And you've hit the nail on the head. But as with most historical dumpster fires, there's a whole lot of weirdness sprinkled in amongst the ashes of human misery. So if you're tired of the same old boring history lessons that focus on, actual facts and figures, then you've stumbled upon the perfect channel. We're talking medieval medical practices that would make even H.H. Holmes bat an eye. And trust me, that's a high bar to clear. So grab your herbal tea and your medieval garlic necklaces, because things are about to get plaguey. Let's play a little game of what the flip is on your face. Or at least, let's talk about what passed for fashion during the Black Death. Picture this. Europe in the 14th century, a complete and utter hotbed of death. And what's the hottest accessory for the discerning plague enthusiast? Well, it's a gorgeous beak mask, obviously. Yes, you heard that correctly. People were strutting around, looking like they were late for an incredibly morbid Renaissance fair. These weren't just any beaks, though. Oh no, these beaks were stuffed with herbs, spices and flowers, because, if you're going to die a horrible death, you might as well smell delightful while doing so. The long beak was designed to purify the air they breathed, which is a bit like trying to spit on a forest fire, but hey, they get an E for effort, I suppose. These plague doctor masks were the medieval version of our N95, just with a much more bird-like twist. But let's be real, if we are comparing fashion choices during a pandemic, at least they were trying to accomplish something. Remember some of the things people wore just a few years ago? Crocs, a snorkel, and a hazmat suit. We've all seen some bizarre things. It's enough to make you long for the days of beak masks. People of the time genuinely believed the long beak would protect them from the plague. But sadly, it did nothing other than make them look crazy. Moving along, let's talk about everyone's favourite topic, dancing. Specifically, let's talk about the time the Black Death apparently decided to moonlight as a DJ and threw a rave in Strasbourg in 1518. Yeah, you heard that right, a rave during the Black Death. It all started innocently enough with one woman, Frau Troffea, who just couldn't stop herself from busting a move. And when I say couldn't stop, I mean it. This woman danced for days on end. Days! No sleep, no food. Just pure, unadulterated twerking for the cause. And if that wasn't weird enough, she was soon joined by dozens, then hundreds of other people, all compelled by some unknown force to dance until they dropped. Now, you might think that in the midst of a devastating pandemic, people would be a little more concerned about, not dying a horrific death, but here we are. It's like someone forgot to tell them there was a highly contagious and deadly disease going around. They had total commitment to the party. Now, you'd think that faced with a bunch of weirdos dancing themselves to death, the medical professionals of the time would maybe try to talk some sense into them. Perhaps suggest a nice, relaxing cup of chamomile tea. But no, their solution, more dancing. They actually built a stage and hired musicians, figuring that if these people were going to dance themselves into an early grave, they might as well do it in style. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Okay, weirdos, buckle up, because we're about to delve into the world of crazy medieval catspiracy theories. You see, back in the plague-ridden days, people thought cats were in cahoots with witches. Side note, let's be honest, that's a pretty sweet band name. So naturally they did what any rational person facing a deadly pandemic wouldn't do. They slaughtered cats in masses. Picture it, existential dread sets in. You see a cat staring at you with those cold, evil, unblinking eyes, and you think, naturally, these adorably heinous beasts must be the problem. Nonetheless, here's the kicker. It was the cats whom were actually keeping the real culprits in check, those nasty, vile, disease-ridden rats. Rats, those furry little plague barges, were having a field day knowing all their feline foes were out of the picture for good. It's almost like someone forgot to tell medieval Europe that blaming cats for the plague is like blaming your goldfish for a house fire. It's misguided, counterproductive, and honestly, a little fishy. So, congratulations, medieval folks, you doomed yourselves. You decimated the cat population, exploded the rat population, and the plague spread faster than a juicy rumour about Smelly Betty in the high school cafeteria. But hey, at least you got rid of those spooky witch cats, right? It's almost enough to make you wonder if the Dark Ages were just one long drawn-out Monty Python sketch. All right, let's talk about everyone's favourite pungent bulb, garlic. Now, I love a good garlic bread as much as the next guy, but wearing it? Not incredibly keen on the idea. That's a bold move, even for, let's face it, the already malodorous medieval folks. But that's exactly what they did during the Black Death. Picture this. You're strolling through a plague-ridden village, the stench of death and decay hanging heavy in the air, and suddenly, bam! You're hit with a wall of garlic pungency that could knock over a horse. That's right, folks. Garlic necklaces were all the rage. They believed the pungent aroma would ward off the plague. Did it work? Well, let's just say if the plague was caused by vampires with a sensitivity to Italian food, they'd have been sitting ducks. Well, more appropriately, dead ducks. Sadly, for those poor souls, the plague didn't discriminate based on your choice of allium-based accessories. But hey, at least they all smelled like spicy, dirty armpits. I mean, can you imagine the social gatherings? It must have been like a medieval garlic festival gone wrong. Okay, folks, let's talk about unicorns. Majestic creatures of myth and legend, known for their shimmering coats, their magical horns, and their surprising effectiveness at curing the bubonic plague? Well, not quite. You see, in their infinite wisdom and utter desperation, medieval pharmacies began peddling what they claimed were unicorn horns as a cure, all for the plague. Now, I'm no zoologist, but something tells me unicorns weren't exactly lining up to donate their horns to the cause. So, what were these miracle cures really made of? Turns out they were just narwhal tusks. Yes, those spiraled pointy teeth protruding from the heads of narwhals, you know, those unicorns of the sea. Look, I get it. When you're facing a deadly pandemic, you're willing to try anything, even if it means believing a fish tooth can magically cure you. But you've got to admire the medieval marketing strategy here. Unicorn horn just sounds so much more appealing than narwhal tusk, doesn't it? It's like calling a used car dealership the pre-owned chariot emporium. It's all about the branding, people. But hey, at least no unicorns were harmed in the making of these bogus plague remedies. Narwhals, on the other hand, well, let's just say they probably weren't too thrilled about the whole ordeal. All right, let's talk about rats. Specifically, the rats that spread the bubonic plague with the same casual disregard you or I might spread gossip in a group chat. Now imagine living in a time before modern pest control, when your only hope against these disease-ridden rodents was a ragtag group of professionals known as the Rat Catchers Guild. These were the medieval Ghostbusters, but instead of battling spectral projections with unlicensed nuclear accelerators, they were armed with nothing more than nets, traps, and a frankly alarming tolerance for rodent-related unpleasantness. Their job, as you might imagine, was about as appealing as a week-old bowl of porridge. But somebody had to do it, and do it they did, venturing into the darkest corners of plague-ridden cities, risking their lives to curb the rat population. Now, you might be thinking, surely these brave souls were lauded as heroes, showered with riches and accolades. Well, you'd be wrong. These guys were literally putting their lives on the line to save others from a gruesome death. So, the next time you see a rat, maybe offer a silent thank you to the Rat Catchers Guild of yore. They may not have had fancy proton packs, but they were the unsung heroes of the bubonic plague. Now, let's move on to the cures for the plague. And when I say cures, what I actually mean is a horrifying concoction of ingredients that would make a Richard Simmons wellness smoothie look like a Michelin-starred meal. We're talking ground-up gemstones, mercury, frog livers, and more than likely pig intestines. Basically, if it could be found in a medieval apothecary and looked vaguely disgusting, it was probably thrown into the mix. Imagine this, you're feverish, covered in buboes, and you've got roughly the same odds of survival as a hamster in a hawk sanctuary. But fear not, for the local barber surgeon, because of course barbers were also surgeons back then, has just the thing for you, a potion that smells like a troll's butthole and has the consistency of swamp mud. The logic behind these concoctions was about as sound as a politician's promise during an election year. They believed in the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, and thought that balancing these fluids was the key to curing, well, pretty much everything. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. So while these potions might not have cured the plague, they certainly provided a different kind of entertainment, the kind where you watch with morbid fascination as someone drinks something that looks like it could melt a pewter tankard. Ah, medieval medicine, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the questionable decision-making skills of our ancestors. Now, if you thought drinking ground-up frog livers was a bit much, buckle up, because medieval plague remedies also involved a healthy dose of music. Yes, you heard that right. Forget antibiotics and antiviral medications, folks, because in the 14th century, the hottest track on the plague survival playlist was apparently a Gregorian chant in C major. Physicians, in their infinite wisdom, believed that music held mystical powers, capable of driving away evil spirits and restoring balance to the body. So, while you were busy sweating out the bubonic plague, your best bet for survival was to hire a lute player to serenade you with the medieval equivalent of "Don't Stop Believin'." Now, I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure a lute solo wouldn't do much to combat a highly contagious bacterial infection. But hey, at least it was more pleasant than being bled with leeches or forced to drink a concoction that could strip paint. And who knows? Maybe the soothing melodies provided some much-needed psychological relief in the face of a terrifying pandemic. But let's be real, the only thing this musical approach cured was the awkward silence that probably filled the plague wards. It's a testament to the enduring power of music, even if its efficacy as a medical treatment is about as reliable as an umbrella in a hurricane. Right, so the Black Death is ravaging Europe. People are dropping like poorly aimed juggling pins, and what's the solution? Well, according to the surprisingly influential voices of the time, the answer was water, but not just any water, mind you. Oh no, that would be far too sensible. We're talking about water specifically sourced from holy wells. Now, you might be thinking, Sonny, surely you're being facetious. No one could possibly believe a specific well held magical plague-curing properties. And to that I say buckle up, buttercup, because medieval logic is a wild ride. They were absolutely convinced that these wells, blessed by who knows what, were basically medieval lords. The problem, of course, and there's always a problem, isn't it? The problem was that these wells were about as hygienic as a barber's bowl after a particularly nasty case of head lice. I'm talking contaminated, bacteria-ridden, a veritable buffet for waterborne illnesses. So not only were people not getting cured, they were basically lining up for a second helping of pestilence. It's like trying to put out a grease fire with gasoline. It just doesn't make any bloody sense. But hey, at least they were hydrated, right? Now, we've already established that medieval medicine was less about science and more about throwing whatever you could find at the wall and hoping something stuck. We've had ground, gemstones, pig intestines, and potions that probably smelled like a warthog's hoof. Nothing says medical breakthrough quite like strapping a live chicken to an oozing, pus-filled bubo. Yes, you heard me correctly. The medieval medical geniuses decided that the best way to cure the plague was to use a chicken as a sort of feathery poultice for disease. The idea, as far as I can tell, was that the chicken would somehow magically suck the plague out of the weeping wounds. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Instead, all they got was a terrified chicken, covered in what likely resembled a frog, stuffed with worms and cockroaches after it's been run over by an 18-wheeler, and probably a salmonella chaser on top of their already horrific plague. So, the plague is running rampant, people are dropping like flies at a picnic, and you're desperate for a solution. What do? Well, if you were part of the flagellant movement, you'd grab the nearest whip and start wailing on yourself like it owed you money. These folks genuinely believed that the Black Death was God's punishment for humanity's sins, and the best way to show your remorse, self-flagellation of course, because nothing says I'm sorry quite like turning yourself into a human piñata of pain, Now, I'm no theologian, but I'm pretty sure self-harm isn't high on the list of God's preferred methods of atonement. I mean, it's not like they were hurting anyone, right? Except, well, themselves. And likely spreading more disease through open wounds and shared whips. So, as we've seen, the Black Death is wreaking havoc on everyone, everywhere. People are dropping like rusty nails from a rotted fence. So, what do the brilliant minds of the time come up with? Well, they stumbled upon the concept of quarantine. Now, you might think quarantine, that makes sense. Isolate the sick, stop the spread, easy peasy. And you'd be right, in theory. See, the Venetians, those maritime masterminds, they were onto something. They decided to isolate ships arriving from plague-ridden ports for 40 days. 40 giorni, they called it, which, surprise, surprise, is where we get the word quarantine. Now, here's the kicker. While the intention was noble, the execution, well, let's just say it was a bit medieval. Because while those ships were stuck in watery purgatory, they were essentially floating buffets for rats. And we all know what rats were to the Black Death. Tiny, furry, disease-ridden delivery drivers. So, while you've got humans stuck in isolation, you've got a plague rave going on below deck, with a bunch of rodents high-fiving and tripping on acid in filth. The whole thing was about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Now, you can't talk about the Black Death without addressing the elephant in the room, or, more accurately, the millions of skeletons piled high in the backyard. Because, folks, when it came to death, the Black Death was basically the Grim Reaper on a Tinder spree. It was an equal opportunity killer. With bodies piling up faster than a Starbucks line on a Monday morning, the whole traditional burial thing kind of went out the window. I mean, can you imagine digging individual graves for what felt like your entire town? Your arms would be as ripped as a medieval tapestry, but also you'd probably die. So they came up with a new plan, the plague pit. Now, these weren't your grandma's backyard compost heaps. These were mass graves, big enough to make a stadium concert jealous, and they were filled to the brim with the dearly and not so dearly departed. It was grim, folks, grim. The stench alone could knock you out faster than a right hook from Iron Mike. The plague pits were a stark reminder of the sheer scale of the devastation. And for the survivors, well, let's just say the job market was wide open. Right, so the Black Death was a bummer. Like a real downer. And you know what happens when people get bummed out? They write poetry, they mope about in black, form a dark, gloomy band likened to The Cure. The Black Death had a similar effect on medieval art, so naturally art took a bit of a turn towards the dark side. We're talking skulls, skeletons, and this whole dance macabre thing, which basically translates to dance of death. Imagine a rave, but instead of glow sticks, everyone's waving around a sickle. It was all very symbolic, we're all going to die, let's dance about it. Listen, you try living through the Black Death and see if you don't start incorporating a few skulls into your interior design. And honestly, who can blame them? When you're staring down a highly contagious and often fatal disease, sometimes you just gotta laugh to keep from crying. Or dance. Or paint a really morbid fresco. So, there you have it. The bizarre, the absurd, and the downright weird facts about the Black Plague. History can be dark, but it can also be hilariously strange. And let's be honest, if we don't laugh at the absurdity of it all, we're all doomed to repeat it. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Because let's face it, you need something to distract you from the impending sense of doom that the news media throws at us these days. Until next time, keep it absurd, history buffs. Sunny over and out.